Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Personalization Outbreak Podcast, your go-to podcast for meaningful conversations with influential leaders from different sectors every week. Now, our guest this week comes from the education sector. Bill Hulseman is an independent consultant who designs rituals, supports educators, and facilitates dialogue, and you'll see that during our conversation today. See, Bill previously served as Director of Academic Affairs, Professional Development, Social Action, and Campus Ministry at multiple schools throughout the country. Now, as you will experience, Bill is unafraid to address the real issues. And based upon my own experiences, I see Bill as an explorer. He's provocative, fair, and extremely well-read. In fact, Bill was a speaker at our 2020 Leadership in the Age of Personalization Summit, and he will attend as a consortium member to the 2021 summit that will be hosted by Lightspeed VT in Las Vegas. Now, we'll explore how we can unleash individuality at the summit by interrupting our assumptions about who belongs where, doing what, and how. So make sure that you register now to watch the live streaming free at 2021summit.ageofpersonalization.com. Now, during this podcast interview, we'll talk about the importance of prioritizing people and discuss when and why we start prioritizing institutions over people and how it contributes to building a sense of fear from change and how that's impacting our efforts to transform both individually and collectively. So before we get started, please click the like button below, share it with your colleagues, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and social media at Glenn Yope so that you're in touch with our most recent content about leadership in the age of personalization. Let's get started. You are listening to Personalization Outbreak, a podcast about the collapse of traditional corporate standards in today's more personalized world. I'm Glenn Yopes. I'm a leadership strategist, author, contributor to Forbes, and founder of the Leadership in the Age of Personalization movement. On this show, I'm interviewing executives across multiple sectors to find out how the balance between standardization and personalization can exist. Bill, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Glenn. And I'm flattered and honored by your introduction.
Well, come on, Bill. It's not as if I haven't experienced you enough to know that introduction is real and true, my friend. So on that note, let's get to know you as an individual. Let's give our audience an opportunity to get to know you. So when preparing for our discussion, Bill, you told me that you enjoy making meaning. Please elaborate. What is making meaning?
Yeah, meaning is one of those concepts, one of those ideas that we think is really intangible, right? I actually think it's more tangible than we think it is. So, meaning, I think of that as a product of our experiences and our history and who we are. And when we have an experience, we can be conscious of how our past, how our present, and how our future are intersecting. And what is it telling me about the world? What is it telling me about myself? What is it telling me about people around me? So it's the product of the intersection of all these things. The meaning that you can create, the meaning that you can discern, you can draw on for motivation or energy or comfort or challenge, whatever it is. But that meaning becomes fuel. It becomes a motivator for the next moment in your life. I think meaning begins, the search for meaning, there are a lot of books about it. Man's Search for Meaning is one of the most popular. But it doesn't always have to be heavy. It doesn't always have to be deep philosophy. I think it starts with paying attention to the little things, paying attention to our experiences, paying attention to our relationships, paying attention to the things that make us laugh. Those are all moments that we can stop and discern what of my past is meeting this present and how will that guide me into the future. That's making meaning.
That's beautiful, Bill. And, as we think about the tensions that we've been experiencing between the age of standardization in the age of personalization, it begs the question, Bill, how did we make meaning of anything during the age of standardization that really unknowingly or perhaps knowingly attempted to define us?
Hmm. I think meaning makers have been present and active and influential in every generation. They take on different names, they take on different capacities, they take on different roles in society. So it's always been there. I think with the age of standardization, like so much of the modern era, uh, modernization, industrialization, capitalization of everything happens, right? So even art, even music, even personal care becomes monetized, becomes commercialized. So the meaningful stuff, the typical spaces or the typical experiences that people would look to make meaning, to have a meaningful experience, suddenly becomes second to the monetized version or to the productive version or option in life. So I think in the age of standardization, when we start to pay attention to the ways that our experiences, our institutions, the things that we've built up around us, those are blocking us in some way. And if we can pay closer and closer attention, we can start to dismantle that wall and start to enter into whatever's next. I think you speak so beautifully about the shift from standardization to personalization. I think it echoes the cultural shifts that we've been seeing in art and philosophy and science in terms of moving from the modern age to the postmodern age. And we don't have a better name for it than to call it the postmodern age because we're in the middle of it or we're at the start of it. So we don't even know what's going to characterize the life that we're living. The standardized instinct is to quick put a name on it, right? So every generation that comes up, we start seeing a trend. Therefore, they're the millennials. Therefore, they're the generation Y. They get a name, but they haven't had. We don't have the distance yet to be able to see what is the real impact, what's really different. So along the way, I think that to be able to facilitate the change from standardization to personalization, we have the opportunity to be intentional about it, to pay attention to little things, be very intentional about what is the world that we want to see, what's the world we want to create, and then move that way. And assume that we all have agency, we all have authority in doing that. We don't just hand it over to the dominant businesses or politicians or cultural voices that want to shape our path in some way. So every one of us has an opportunity to shape that transition from this age to what's next. It doesn't just happen; we create it. So the more we can engage that agency, the faster we can bring on what's next.
I love it, Bill. And you always have such an eloquent way of describing things. And the reason I wanted to stay on, making meaning for just a moment is I think that that's what the pandemic and the social unrest did. It became an accelerant for people to ask themselves, what matters to you? How do you make meaning for yourself, for those around you, for your loved ones? What's next for you as an individual, and how can you influence the world around you in ways that aren't predefined for you? So thank you for touching on that, Bill. The next question I have is, how do you create space? And maybe you touched on this a little bit already, but how do you create space to make the most important changes that matter to you, or to build community? I mean, why is this your jam?
Meaning making is my jam. It's fun. It's it's when you start to see your capacity in this world and you start to understand it, you can feel burdened. You can feel stressed out by it, but you can also feel empowered by it. You can enjoy it. So that we have gifts and we have capacities and we see the world one way. Let's figure out what we have to offer to make it a different way, to make it the world that we envision, right? I love having those conversations with people. I want to hear what they envision for the world. I love doing weddings because I get to work with a couple, and we think about together, what's the world they want to see, and then we design the wedding around that. We start planning the ceremony as an exposure to the world that they want to create. They're going to invite everybody into that world for a minute, and that's going to change everybody. That's going to impact everybody in some meaningful and significant way, and they're going to take that with them. So it's I enjoy meaning making because of that process and the intimacy that comes with it, but also the real insight that comes with it. I like seeing how culture is created. I like seeing how relationships shape people. So yeah, when I say meaning making is my jam, it's because it's totally enjoyable. Looking back over my career, everything that I've really been energized by, everything that I've really felt really successful in, has been tapping into that same pot, right? Tapping into that joy of paying attention, that joy that comes from understanding something about someone, or how we can change this little thing to make that experience that much better for someone over there.
So this is a good transition to, first of all, Bill, thank you for that. I certainly have gotten to know you better, and we've talked quite a bit. So how do you define the difference between change and transformation? I mean, I think we all need to be reminded that, before the pandemic and social unrest, many institutions and organizations were already in crisis. I mean, disruption was in full swing. So given your human side of the ways that you think, what's the difference in your mind between change and transformation?
Yeah, I think it's really important to clarify the distinction between that, because I think when most folks are talking about transformation, they're really talking about change, and they're connected, but they're not the same. Change can be natural. Change is passive. It happens to you. It's instinctive, but it's limited. It's temporary. So a change is a discrete difference that happens to you. It might be in a response to something. It might be adapting to something. It might be, so it's totally natural. We see that those kinds of changes, and we affect small changes every day in response to other things. They're not necessarily intentional. They're not necessarily pursuing a vision, right? That's where transformation, I think, is distinct. It's unnatural. Quite literally, the word means to undergo a change in form. So it's very directly an unnatural process. It's not about preserving the original state in any way. It's about, it's only limited by what we can imagine and the tools that are at our fingertips. So in transformation, the original state is gone. It's irrelevant. If we cling to that original state that we left behind, that we transformed out of, that only invites suffering and grief, right? And conflict. So transformation is an intentional elevation of change. I think a lot of little changes can contribute toward transformation, but I think of it as an intentional process. So the person or the group or the bigger group, community that is seeking or experiencing some transformation, they've got a direction they want to go. They see who they want to be over there. And they're going to use whatever experiences to affect small changes toward that transformation. So I also don't think it's a single moment of transformation, right? It's a process. We celebrate birthdays every year to mark some sort of progress and growth, but it's not like you turn 13 and all of a sudden puberty kicks in high drive. It's been happening over time. It's just we've used these markers to make sense of it and to make meaning of it.
So I have to ask the question is it transformation that we seek, or is it evolution?
I think if it's a question of what we seek, I hope we're seeking transformation, because we're already experiencing evolution. The difference is If it's just happening to us, then we're not contributing to it. Then it's not we're not creating it. We're not partnering with the universe in shaping it. So I think, I think that's a fair distinction.
So Bill, how do you begin to see all of this from more of a human perspective?
Okay, well, I've got a couple of tacks toward this, and this is one approach. This is my approach coming from my starting point. So I don't intend this to be universal rules. That I'm not going to write a self-help book that's going to say this is the silver bullet. This is one starting point. On one level, somewhere along the line, we started prioritizing institutions over people. This reflects a worldview that is very, very ancient. So somewhere over time, this didn't happen after the 60s. This happened thousands of years ago. We've been building this worldview for a long time, but it's not the only worldview. It's not the only way to see the world. Anyway, it reflects this ancient worldview that there is an ideal out there. There is a perfect out there. The values of beauty and truth, and that there is some ideal form out there, and we and the world that we live in are really just some sort of imperfect imitation or echo or shadow or a degraded version of that ideal. So our job as humans in that worldview is to try to be perfect, try to pursue that ideal. And I think we see this reflected in, we've built institutions to prop up this idea, and everything from hierarchical governments and religious organizations to the pomp and circumstance of the Olympics. So the Olympics, I think, is a great example of, do we value the institution or the human? And Simone Biles rocked the world when she withdrew from competition. Mm-hmm. One athlete had a rough week and withdrew, and it created this international clamor of why, what's happening? I think, when she chose to attend to her own needs and to cheer on her team from the side, except for her last event, in this meta ritualized event of the Olympics, right? Everything's heightened anyway. She, in that moment, communicated with her actions. The person is more important than the institution. Simone Biles is not a martyr to the modern experiment of the Olympics. There is more to life than a medal. So, and I hope every child in America absorbs that message from this experience, because they're the ones who are going to be the agents of transformation down the line. And the earlier they can hear the message, which is pretty countercultural, that you are infinitely more important than the institutions that you are part of, that you make up, then I think we'll see long-term change come a little bit faster. So the first thing I think we can do, we can follow Biles' example of, valuing in very clear, discrete ways, the person is more important than the institution. The second thing, I think we forget that institutions are people. Like, we think of them as these abstractions. Again, I think it's an echo of that ancient worldview, that there is there's this abstract institution that I should revere, whatever the institution is. But those institutions are made up of people. Recently, the Citizens United versus the FEC Supreme Court opinion comes to mind. It's problematic in giving institutions status equivalent to people, but it sparked conversation about the people at the center, both the people being disenfranchised by institutional consolidation of power and the people in the institutions who are using the institutions or hiding behind them. So we see the institutions have been empowered in our culture today. But another negative aspect of this is that we assume that the people within the institution are also all on the same page. And that's an illusion. We can't assume that all queer people want this or all Republicans want that. That, I think, in your language would be the return to tribalism, right? So I think the second thing to do is to develop our own critical lenses, to be able to see beyond the facade, see beyond the abstraction of the institution, whatever the institution is, and prioritize the people that make up the institution. We spend a lot of time talking about institutional change or organizational change. But how often in that conversation do we say, oh, and it starts with personal change? So I think we need to prioritize people, the agency of people in those institutions, right? So if you want change to happen in an institution, and the institution is made up of people, well, isn't it just so obvious? You got to start with the people. So there's this brings up a quote that is everywhere. You see it on mugs and T-shirts and motivational posters, and it's attributed to Gandhi. And it's be the change that you wish to see in the world. That's lovely. However, that's not what Gandhi wrote. Here's the full quote. Gandhi wrote, "We but mirror the world. All the tendencies present in the outer world are to be found in the world of our body. If we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. A man changes his own nature, so does the attitude of the world change towards him. This is the divine mystery supreme. A wonderful thing it is, and the source of our happiness. We need not wait to see what others do." I think that last line is the one that should be on all the coffee mugs, right? We need not wait to see what others do. So Gandhi lays out the difference between change and transformation here in a way. Each discrete change is limited, but when we make those changes toward a vision, then we're opening the door to transformation. The popular misquote, I think, misses the most important insight from Gandhi. Our connection to the world, our integration into the world. So the misquote bolsters independence, that notion of I can change and I'm going to change the world and I'm the hero, right? That's classic Messiah complex. But Gandhi was actually pointing to interdependence. He was actually recognizing that any change I make in myself is going to have an impact on the people in the world around me, and vice versa, right? It's reciprocal, it's iterative, it's unpredictable because it's just going to keep going with every interaction. So that interdependence is what he's really pointing to. So I think when we start focusing on changing people and owning our agency within institutions, that's where real deep transformation and equitable transformation can really start. So, when we don't start with it. Oh yeah. Okay.
So Bill, I am blown away by this. And so I have to ask this question. Hasn't the time come where we all need to turn the spotlight of accountability on ourselves? I mean, why do we always wait for permission to do most things, unless you're an entrepreneur that recognizes that their future is dependent upon them taking the actions? But why is it that people don't look at themselves in the mirror and say, what can I do better? Why do we have to wait? Has this become just a byproduct of standardization? I mean, or are we really fearful to find ways to evolve ourselves?
There was a commercial several years ago, and now I can't remember the origin of the commercial. I think it was in Southeast Asia, and there was a piece of garbage on the ground, and a crowd sort of forms around this piece of trash, and everyone's arguing about it. Oh, I can't believe this piece of trash is here. Oh, somebody should have thrown that out. Oh, how dare somebody just leave this around? And the crowd grows, and they're all bickering with each other, and they're all making these observations about the piece of trash on the ground. And somebody walks up, picks up the piece of trash, and puts it in the garbage can that is 2 feet away, and just keeps walking, and everybody else is stunned. I'm reminded of that, thinking of your question. It's so easy. If we put down the shackles, if we stepped outside of the blame game, it's not the abstract that is controlling this. It is not always other people's fault. Sometimes it is, but just pointing a finger doesn't do anything to actually change the situation. So I think it does force the question, though, if it's been that easy. If I've been able to articulate this, other people have understood this too, right? I am not an superhumanly wise person. um, I think I understand this. Other people do too, but I think maybe people don't really want the change. Maybe people don't. Maybe people are afraid of the change because they don't know what's on the other side. I heard
Bill,
somebody's.
or Bill, let me ask you this: or do you think that the systems were designed not to unleash one's individuality to the point where people just don't have the self-trust unless the institution gives it to them?
This would be the time for a Marxist critique, wouldn't it? To be looking at the systems of power. I'm not a Marxist, but I think it's useful to think in that way sometimes, looking at the power dynamic, right? So those institutions that were built up. So like I talked about, the hierarchical organizations like religious groups or governments that are authoritarian, right? It increases the distance between the people and the power. And that gets in the way, right? So if people, if the power remains with the people who like that structure, who's going to know any differently, right? So change has to start happening for the people who are at the bottom of that power pyramid, to be able to even see what the other possibilities are. So it's comfortable. It's comfortable. People get into a rhythm of, the standardization offers a lot of comfort and security and predictability. Great, cool. But there are other possibilities that might help you flourish as a person a little bit more. And wouldn't that be nice to start with who are you as a person? And what do you want out of this life? Instead of, I want to work my tush off and make a lot of money so that when I'm 70, I can stop working and enjoy it for about 7 or 8 years before my body goes into decline. So if we can start making decisions for ourselves, we saw this out of the pandemic, right? So and it's a total example of that highlights, if we don't start with our humanity, then we're denying our humanity. So the work from home phenomenon suddenly worked for a lot of people in a lot of organizations. And now it's safer to start returning to the office. And there's tension there because people realize, I don't actually have to spend X number of hours in that office to do my job well. In fact, I can be a more full human being and design my schedule around life as a human being. And maybe that's good for everybody. So I think that's been one of those examples of here's this change that has been a total response, but it opens the door for transformation. We didn't choose to be forced to work from home, but now we can make the choice to move forward by reverting or, hey, maybe we're onto something, and iterate and keep moving forward. But it comes back to that starting with the human first and not prioritizing the human over the institution.
Well, and this is interesting, Bill, because it's clear, just listening to you, that the pandemic made those who enjoyed working from home more resilient because they had to, tap into their own resources, tend to their families, create their own schedules and tackle their assignments on their own terms. And they got used to it. Mm-hmm. And they did it because it made them more resilient. They basically began discovering something about themselves that standardization never gave them the opportunity to discover. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because recently I was on a call with an executive.
And not just about themselves, but about each other.
Yeah, thank you. Very good. Yeah. Okay, and that's a perfect transition to this one example, Bill. Thank you for saying that. Is that in discussions with an executive just a few days ago, he said, Glenn, who has the problem with remote work? It isn't our employees, it's me. It's executives like myself who in standardization feels that if the individual wants to do things on their own terms, I lose power. I lose some sense of control. And so again, this validates your notion that, transformation needs to be human-centered, which begs the question, Bill, where did your understanding about all of this come from? I feel like I'm talking to an encyclopedia. I mean, how did you get us? How did you learn all these things? I'm sure it's a little bit of professional and personal.
Yeah, I think it, we are the product of our experiences, right? And what we do with that is how we present in the world, right? So my understanding of this, I think, well, first personal. We'll start with the human. We'll start with the personal. My identity. I from a very young age knew I was gay, and even though I'm cisgendered, I'm white. I grew up in an affluent area. I'm well educated, so I grew up with a lot of privilege. But I was on the outside. I was on the margins. I was different, and I knew that, and I didn't have language for it, and it just like so many people who have similar experiences, the isolation, the sense of isolation is strong and has a really long lasting effect. I think every kid who grows up like that, they figure out how they're going to cope, how they're going to navigate the world despite whatever challenges are coming at you. I started to hone my instincts to look for other people who are going to see me as a person first and not as, oh, you're different, So I think people who grow up on the margins, people who know discrimination from early on or later in life, they start to hone their instincts to identify those people, to identify those very, very human traits, because those are the people that we can trust. Those are the people that we know are going to keep us safe. So I grew up looking for those glimpses of humanity. I think another big piece of what shaped me and how I see all this is my family, my first context, right? I'm the youngest of 10. So I was born into a diverse and crowded group. And it was a lot of fun, and it was really hard. And I'm the youngest. And so I got to watch all my siblings grow up from a little bit of a distance, and I got to see them make a lot of successes, and they made a lot of failures. So they were very helpful in my own upbringing in that way. But it was also part of a family business. So my grandfather had started a company that my dad led for a long time, and that was interesting. Growing up in a family business, there was an expectation that we were all going to work there at some point. I was not going to have a career in manufacturing, so I was not going to do that. But I put in a couple of summers. I worked at the help desk, which is hilarious to me today. That I was on the help desk when I was in high school. But growing up, and several of my siblings had long careers in the company. And when you grow up in a family business, the lines between family and business blur. When your dad is your boss and your boss is your dad, things get very complicated, whether you're in the kitchen or in the office. So I grew up in that context that had me thinking about the tension between people and institutions, from day one. Academically, I studied religion, and I got into the comparative study of religion because I loved understanding how culture gets made, how those moments get made, how those communities get built, and how entire long, multi-generational traditions start to expand and influence the world. So that was interesting, and I was paying attention to those kinds of things. I also, when I went back to grad school for a degree in school leadership, I was introduced to the philosophy of Nell Noddings, who herself, as a philosopher, she started as a classroom teacher, and then developed what she called the ethics of care, where rejecting kind of classic ethics that guide our thinking and how we construct our moral universe, typically in the West. Nell Noddings turns it on its head and says, no, you have to start with the person. You start with the relationship. In looking at schools as an example, the school, that the student is, what does she say? The student is infinitely more important than the subject matter. And everything from disciplinary conversations to events for the community or how programs get built, she challenges educators to look at the person first, build the program, build the school, build the discipline structures around what's going to help these individual people thrive. And that's what's going to make a true community. So being introduced to Nell Noddings really gave me language for things that I, as a young teacher, was learning, and then that I saw, and then I saw every day. I'm like, oh, this is how transformation happens. It's not about filling these young people with all this wonderful knowledge that I've acquired. It's, okay, how can I create a context where you are going to be your best self? And I'm going to try to help you along the way, but really you're doing all the work. So that was sort of between my early academic stuff and also my early career stuff, I had a really clear sense of I need to be person-centered, whether I'm in my career or in my life. And that became really clear to me. And then different roles I've had, it's all come back to that building and sustaining relationships, because I know that those relationships are building this community, and this community is shaping the world.
So, Bill, as we get near our time to wrap it up, you're making me feel as if we're now experiencing a blurry line between hierarchy and human. What do you think?
Is it that blurry? I think it's a clear line. I think, well, let's extend the metaphor. So if I think it's a line that maybe is blurred in some spaces and it's chipped away in others, and it's reinforced at others. I think everybody is coming at it from a different angle and with a different vigor, pursuing that kind of change to be able to dismantle hierarchical systems that do not serve everybody's interest. So is it a blurred line? Maybe in some spots, but I think for some people it's actually reinforced, or they're trying to actively reinforce it. And then others, they've been able to chip away and been able to break through. So you get to see examples of people who have made real change. They've started companies, or they started schools, or they've written a book that is a different way of thinking and is starting to build a new path toward whatever is next. Yeah.
Look,
did I mess with your metaphor too much?
Oh, no. Look, Bill, I'm just asking the question, and maybe I asked it the wrong way, but I feel that most people are still trying to find the human in the hierarchy. In other words, people may be at a certain level, but what gives them a pass not to be human? And is it that they're not ready to give up their sense of power? Is it not that should be tied to not being human, because you could be powerful and be human? But why is it maybe that we can't accelerate the sense of our human dignity when we think about transformation? Because your entire message on this in our conversation today is that, at least my takeaway is, there is no transformation without putting the human first. So if the leaders in these large institutions can't be human and turn the spotlight of accountability on themselves, can we transform it all?
Yes. I'm hopeful. I'm an eternal optimist. I think a general rule of thumb for me is don't tell other people what they're experiencing. And in hierarchical organizations, the top sets the tone, right? Or develops the message. That's telling everybody else within the organization what to feel. Here's what you're feeling right now. And if you feel something differently, it may be disruptive. It may be rejected. It may be treated as hostile, just for pointing out, hey, there is another way to see this. I think our view is blocked in terms of what is our potential, what is our real capacity. And people in power, I think it's the responsibility of people in power to dismantle those, whatever it is that's blocking everybody's ability to see what's next or what is possible. I think if people are comfortable in some sort of in a hierarchy that's not good for humans, it's because they've been told and conditioned, and they ultimately believe, oh yeah, this is good for me. And it might be good for some people, and that's great, but it's not good for everybody. And so again, we can't tell everybody, oh, this is good for you. No, trust me, it's good for you. You don't know what you're feeling right now. I'll tell you what you're feeling. Here's what you need. So I think that's that comes back to relationships, right? So our relationships, especially if we have some modicum of power in our grasp, is to use that relationship or to use that power in the service of that relationship, of bringing everybody up instead of keeping everybody in place. So we have lots of opportunities to do that. Every conversation with somebody, anytime you're walking down the hallway and acknowledging somebody, that's a way to acknowledge, hey, you're human, I'm human, we're here at this moment. Cool. Don't have to be best friends, but you can acknowledge each other's dignity and then keep moving. That's a practice that if you can internalize, if you can do that regularly, you start to see the humanity a lot more boldly, a lot more brightly, and a lot more beautifully than before.
Well, I think you may have answered, but I'm going to give you the room to add to it if you'd like. And here's my final question, Bill, is how should people view relationships now? How can they?
In the service of not telling other people what to feel.
Exactly.
I will say this. I view relationships as primary in any context. They've got to be the priority. The person and the relationship to the person have got to be our starting points for everything. And that's for myself. That's for my own ethical decisions. So when I know that I have failed, it's because I have not done this in the service of other people as people. And if I can prioritize people through those relationships, if I can cultivate relationships with the people that I need to connect with the people that I need to be influenced by, then I'm bolstering myself. I'm on the path toward becoming my best self. And following what Mohandas Gandhi said, if I can change myself, then I can change the world.
Well, Bill, I'll tell you, every time I talk to you, I always feel as if you're very present. And I think that you bring a level of wisdom and understanding of human dignity that certainly makes you distinct, my friend. So thank you so much for being on the show and just for imparting upon us what it means to be human in these times of transformation. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks, Glenn.
As we always leave the show, when you lead in the age of personalization, you will see things that others don't, do what others won't, and keep pushing when prudence says quit. Thanks again, Bill. Always a pleasure.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to Personalization Outbreak. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. If you enjoyed the content, visit ageofpersonalization.com to check out our free streaming video series and learn how to get involved in the movement. I'm Glenn Yopes. I wish you a good day, and remember, without strategy, change is merely substitution, not evolution.